One of the things that I do, like with my label Broken Records that I have now, which is actually the second generation label from Jesse. I just kind of decided that Jesse was so special that it should just stay what it was, with what it started, with the classics and whatnot. And I just picked up in the 90s, I picked up the moniker Broken Records instead. But basically, that whole tradition has been born on the simplicity of what it's all about. You know, not overproduced, just the vibe, just the feeling, just the straight ahead four on the floor. Keep it interesting with some sound, a nice heavy groove bass line. You know, maybe some vocals here, or maybe a sample there, or maybe just a choral part, or whatever it happens to be. But just keeping with the simplicity of what house music was built on, and bringing it into today what we call the new school as opposed to the old school. So you'll have a vibe of the old school, and then you have the new school vibe on there. So it's an appropriate title for the compilation series.
What artists are you working with on this compilation?
Well, one of the cool tracks on there that I love, my personal favorite, even though I love them all, of course, but my personal favorite on there that seems to be getting a lot of good response is a track called Back to the Days. And this producer DJ Apois, he's from Europe, from Spain actually, and he's got some really cool stuff. We're actually putting together an album on him that we'll be releasing as well. But that particular song, Back to the Days, kind of gives you the whole essence of what old school, new school is about, because it talks about the days of what it was like, when house music captured your soul and your imagination, and, is a constant throughout your whole entire life. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's a really cool track. I like that. And, I have two of my releases on there, which one is I Hear House Music, which is kind of a take on the I Hear Music in the Street, from back in the days, the old disco record. And then House Music Buffet is exactly why it's entitled what it is. It's really a smorgasbord of a lot of diffusion of sounds and feels and whatnot. It almost feels like it's a mashup unto itself. You know what I mean? But it's really, and it's meant to be that way, because it's meant to feel like it's a lot of different things in one, which is, hence the title Buffet.
Is it available in all formats, digital, vinyl, etc.?
Nope, we're just digital. We're only doing digital right now. So it's available at all. Well, I take that back. It's exclusive at Beatport right now. As of the 20th, it'll be available at all other download sites, including iTunes, Napster, you name it.
Okay, and for listeners and viewers, I'll put a link up so you can find that.
And then, beginning in February, I'm actually starting a world tour in support of it, which I'm calling this tour the Global House Tour. And basically, I'm taking that from my show that I do called the Global House Show, which was actually started way back in 1997 in Europe on a satellite radio station called Evo Sonic out of Cologne, Germany. And I've kind of taken it and syndicated it on so many different, stations and things, but it's the cornerstone of my electronic music cafe radio network. 12 noon Pacific time every day. It's a musical history lesson. I call it a musical journey through the history of house music.
Okay, and I'll put a link up for that as well, so everyone go check that out.
Yeah, it's electronicmusiccafe.com. Yeah, and support Broken Records, because we're keeping it real. We're keeping the real sound. We're not going crazy like everybody else. We keep it close. Not to say that we don't experiment and that we don't, because we're open to all genres. A lot of people say, "Oh, you're a house music label." It's like, no, we're a music label. Yes, the majority of stuff we put out is really soulful, funky, and I hasten to use the word soulful, because soulful to a lot of people seems to mean it's more laid back, more garagey, more, you know what I mean? And that's not necessarily what we do. When I say soulful, that means it actually has a soul. Because I get so tired of hearing all of these releases, because, I always say the best and the worst thing to happen to the electronic music culture was the computer. Because prior to being able to make music on your computer, and when I say computer, I exclude the MPC 60s and things like that, the sequencers, as opposed to an actual computer that you use, where you're using Reason or Cubase or whatever to record and make your music, or sample, whatever it happens, Sony Acid, any of those type of programs. And reason being, because, back in those days, you had to actually know and understand music. You had to know what notes were. You had to know how to play a piano. You had to, you know, or a guitar, or whatever it happened to be. So, and you had to put all these things together in arrangement, and it had to be produced. It had to be recorded. Everything was analog. You know what I mean? So it wasn't like you could just go in there, manipulate a couple of switches here and there and a couple of sound and come out with this track where you taking pieces of other people's stuff, free samples and stuff like that. That to me, honestly, although it can be creative, 99% of the time it isn't, because you have too many things at your disposal. You know, when you have to create everything from scratch, it has to come from you. That's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, that's interesting you bring that point up, because many people associate house and anything in the electronic genre as only sampling and sequencing, or actually loop-based software, as opposed to real musical programming.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, you know, because I know a lot of people that feel that way. But what you have to understand is, and this is why the history is so important, the origins and everything are so important, because, you know, I always say the same old saying, if you don't know where you've been, you have no idea where you're going. You know, and then, you know, once I kind of looked towards the future, I had to figure out, how do I put these things together to make them make sense so it actually sounds like a song? Because I didn't have a band or anything, you know, to have players to do all the parts. So I started hunting out what I could use, like as at least to keep time, because I was doing everything to a metronome, right? So it was so funny that Mattel, the toy company, came out with this thing called Sonic's drums, right? So I saw it on TV and I ran out and bought one. It's really a toy kind of drum machine thing, right? So I just programmed a beat in and I started playing it out. So now I had my drums, and I could play, you know, like the chords, and play the bass sign on my left hand and play the chords and melody on my right. So now I had a semblance of what I wanted it to sound like. Once I got that in my head, then I could start working on the other kind of orchestrations in it, like strings and maybe little horn part stabs. Because see, as I'm building this thing, I'm thinking traditional music. I'm not thinking drums, bass, synthesized, you know, sounds and samples. I'm thinking a whole different thing, because at that time, you know, you were listening to the great disco songs and the great R&B and even classic rock, and because a lot of these different styles I grew up with all influenced me as to how I started writing music, right? And then I was also paying attention to all the records that I was playing, because at the time I was at the Playground in Chicago, which was the biggest teen club. We had like 2,000 kids every Friday, Saturday that I played for 12 hours. We went from 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. in the morning. That was before we had all these curfews.
That is a marathon session.
Oh yeah, and that's another thing that I could get into a little later, that I'll touch on just for a second. That as a DJ, playing, you know, for an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours is like nothing. I mean, people have all these opening DJs and this and that. It's like, dude, no, I want to play at least 3-4 hours. I mean, that for me, that's minimum.
It takes you an hour just to get warmed up.
Yeah, well, you know, it's like I can get into it, but I mean, just to be all the places that I want to take my craft. I don't want to just play this one particular style. You know what I mean? I play everything. House music is everything. It's not just deep. It's not just funky. It's not just electro. It's not just, you know what I mean? It's everything across the board. So in order to really get the feel, I need to have a good 3-4 hours. So, but at any rate, back to what I was saying in terms of the actual production. So when I produced Fantasy, actually, you know, going in the studio and I could lay tracks. Now I could lay a track, then go back and play the next track, then go back and play the next track, and go back and play the next track, till everything was put together. So I had 24 tracks of sound, of drums, bass, piano, strings, you name it, right? So that was where the whole thing started. And if you look to artists like Marshall Jefferson, 10 City and what that, all of those they come from the same school I do. Those were well arranged, you know, well thought out, well produced, well written house music songs. You know, and that's what's lost in the translation now. You know, not to say that everything has to be this lavish production with all of these different orchestrations, but it still needs to have a foundation, and it needs to go somewhere. It has to tell a story. It should have peaks and valleys. You know what I mean? The lyrics, whatever you put on top of it, the choruses, you know, the harmonies, everything has to fit together. And that's what's lacking from today's music to a great degree. Now, the one good thing that is happening is that house music has now become pop music. When you got Rihanna and Chris Brown and everybody else doing it, it's pop. You know, and it's the same stuff I was doing back in the 80s. That's what's really the most interesting part to me, is like, I made tracks I'm listening to, like the We Found Love, that new Rihanna track. I did that track 20 something years ago.
Why want to re-release it?
I mean, it's just funny. I mean, obviously I was using slightly different sounds because we were using 909s and 808s back then, but you know, it's I did that track. Anyway, I'm working on some stuff with some other artists now, but my point being is that all of this stuff just comes around full circle, and the beauty of it is finally is getting back to a point where it can become musical again. It was the best and the worst thing that happened was the computer, and the reason being is because it enabled everyone to be able to make music. That's the good part. The bad part is it enabled everyone to be able to make music.
Some that shouldn't be doing it.
Most that shouldn't. Now, I do appreciate the fact that people who otherwise wouldn't have had the chance to express themselves can, and hence that's why, you know, I have my label Broken Records, because I'm not about trying to find, and my distributor tells me this all the time, and I like want to smack them because they've been my distributor forever, and they know what I'm about, and they know what we do over here. But they keep saying, oh, you should sign some big artists and get some big remixers to remix your stuff, and then we can sell, you know, tens of thousands. I was like, you know what? If I can't sell tens of thousands of units on my stuff every time I put something out, then I just won't be doing it, because I refuse to give in to everybody else's way of releasing music. I think that somebody has to take a stand, you know, and say that we're going to put out A, quality music, B, music from giving new people a chance to make their mark and get out there. That's what I'm all about, is breaking new ground and being able to allow that new special producer, songwriter, whatever, a shot to get out there and compete with everybody else.